Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, June 27, 2022. Supreme Court rules that the First Amendment's Freedom of Religion Clause protects a former football coach who was fired for kneeling and praying on the field after games. We'll hear from the coach and talk about this decision with a Supreme Court reporter for The Hill. What is the state of play after the Supreme Court's overturning the landmark 1973 decision Roe v. Wade that legalized abortion, leaving each state to decide its own policy? We'll get 2 points of view, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell and Democratic Senator Tina Smith. Biden administration confirms it will send an advanced air defense system to Ukraine as part of the next package of military assistance to help Ukraine in its fight against Russia's invasion. This as NATO announces a large increase in its rapid response force on the eastern flank. We'll talk with a Washington Times national security reporter about President Joe Biden's meeting with the G7 nation leaders in Germany, and then an upcoming meeting in Spain with the NATO leaders. And one of the newest members of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, former Republican Congressman Frank Wolf of Virginia, expressing particular concern the State Department is not being tougher on Nigeria. From USA Today, in a decision with sweeping implications for the separation of church and state, the Supreme Court on Monday sided with a former high school football coach who lost his job for offering prayers at the 50-yard line after games despite objections from the school district that students felt compelled to take part. In the latest instance of the nation's highest court backing a religious freedom claim, a majority of the justices said that assistant coach Joseph Kennedy's prayers were a private matter and did not amount to the school district's endorsement of Christianity. That from USA Today. Joseph Kennedy interviewed today about this decision and his victory on the Fox News Channel.
How much does this mean to you, not just for you, Coach, and the ability to pray on the field and allow others to join you without coercion? What does it mean for you? But going beyond that, what do you think this means for other coaches who wish to do the same?
You know, coaches or any public employee, I think about the teachers, I think about the janitors, the lunch people, everybody that works in a school district that's a lot of people in this country, and everybody was keeping their eye on all of this to see what the rights are going to be. Are they going to be taken away? And it just shows that, hey, it doesn't matter what your faith is or if you have no faith. It just proves that, you know, this is America and the First Amendment applies, and nobody should have to worry about, now especially, have to worry about just because you want to thank God, you could do it now. And that's just an awesome thing for everybody.
A closer look at the Supreme Court decision in the case Kennedy v. Bremerton School District. Joining us now is John Kurzel, Supreme Court and legal affairs reporter for The Hill. Thanks for being with us. Help us understand the standards or tests that the High Court used in reaching this 6-3 majority opinion. And did they break any new ground or overturn any precedents?
They did break new ground here. And just to set the stage a little bit, this was a big win for the football coach, but perhaps even a bigger win for religious groups across the country. Just to set the stage a little bit, this involved a high school football coach who, over a period of about 7 years, developed a custom of praying on the 50-yard line of the school's football field. The school asked him to stop. He refused. He got in trouble with the school and brought a lawsuit alleging that his First Amendment speech and religious protections were violated here. And what the Supreme Court today did was agreed with him. The majority said the coach's custom amounted to a, quote, brief, quiet, personal religious observance, end quote, and that it was protected under the First Amendment. This was a 6-3 ruling, with the court's 6 conservatives forming a majority over a dissent from the court's liberals. And so it's a win for the coach, but bigger picture here. It is a decision with broader implications. The Constitution prohibits the government from endorsing religion, and today's ruling may make it a lot harder for challengers to convince a court that a government employee's religious conduct has been endorsed by the government. It doesn't formally overrule a landmark case, but it effectively signals to lower courts not to apply it. This is a case called Lemon v. Kurtzman. It's a 1971 case. It gave us what the court has referred to as the quote-unquote Lemon test. And this is a legal test that conservatives have fiercely criticized for decades. They say that it's a test that really is biased against religious interests and that it fosters discrimination and even censorship of religion. So what today's decision did was basically get rid of that lemon test, which had fallen out of fashion, and introduces a new test that says basically for a violation of the Establishment Clause to have occurred, there needs to be some kind of government coercion into religious activity.
And the three dissenting justices, they would have maintained the lemon test. Is that true?
You know, they acknowledge that the lemon test has sort of fallen out of fashion, but they seem to indicate they would have preserved components of it. One of the questions that was raised under that test was whether a reasonable, objective observer would look at particular conduct and think that it was being endorsed by the government. That is now gone. And it's interesting that Justice Sonia Sotomayor, writing for the liberals in dissent, this marks the second time in less than 1 week's time where she has accused her conservative colleagues of eroding this church-state separation. Her other dissent coming last week in a case that dealt with a school tuition policy out of Maine that wanted to exclude religious schools from being eligible for this taxpayer-backed tuition program.
We're talking with John Kurzel from The Hill. There was some news today in another Supreme Court case. The court did not agree to hear the case, but Justice Clarence Thomas, according to reports, expressing his desire to reconsider a precedent on when media outlets can be sued for defamation. Fill in the details for us there.
Sure. So this is not the first time that Justice Thomas has expressed this view, but what's significant is that after last week's decision overturning Roe v. Wade, I think it's fair to say that the country is in a very different world. So I think people are going to be paying a lot more attention to these kinds of signals coming from the court's most conservative members, like Justice Thomas is. And what he did today was reiterate something he said before, which is that he thinks that it is high time that the court revisit a landmark 1964 decision called New York Times versus Sullivan. And what that case stands for is that there's a very, very high barrier to successfully sue a media organization for defamation if you are a public figure. So if you're a celebrity, let's say, and the New York Times writes something that you think was false, if you sue the New York Times, you have to prove not only that it was false, not only that it was a statement of fact, but also that it was published with actual malice, that the newspaper basically knew it was false and recklessly went ahead and published it anyways. The practical effect of this standard is that it's very, very difficult to win lawsuits under this standard. So what Justice Thomas said that he would be interested in doing is revisiting New York Times versus Sullivan. And it's unclear the extent to which other conservative justices may or may not agree with him.
John Kurzel, Supreme Court and legal affairs reporter for The Hill. Find his work at thehill.com and on Twitter at John Kurzel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And some reaction from members of Congress to that football coach praying decision from the Supreme Court in favor of the coach. Republican Ben Cline of Virginia tweeting, "The free exercise of religion is a cornerstone of the Constitution and a fundamental American right. Because of the Supreme Court's ruling today, Americans can continue to pray in peace should they choose to do so." Democratic Congressman Jared Huffman of California with this tweet, "Freedom of religion includes the ability not to participate in religious practices, but that freedom is being methodically stripped by an extremist Supreme Court. This decision took a wrecking ball to the separation of church and state, and with it, the court's legitimacy." And now to Friday's Supreme Court decision that overturned the constitutional right to abortion, the Roe v. Wade decision. This from Associated Press. The fall of Roe v. Wade shifted the battleground over abortion to courthouses around the country Monday, as abortion foes looked to quickly enact statewide bans and the other side sought to buy more time. Abortion right advocates asked a Florida judge to block a new state law which bans abortions after 15 weeks, with some exceptions, and is set to take effect this week. Attorneys hoping to stave off a ban of abortion in Louisiana filed a lawsuit arguing state laws are unclear on when a ban can take effect and what constitutes an exception. Just two of the cases around the country. Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, the minority leader, praised the decision when it came out Friday and today spoke to the Rotary Club of Florence, Kentucky.
And then the decision that everyone is talking about with regard to the abortion issue, what the court did in effect was return this very controversial issue to the people and their representatives so that it can be decided through the democratic process. Now, that's almost entirely likely to occur at the state level, and let me tell you why. In the Senate, most things require 60 votes, not just 51. Neither side of this issue has come anywhere close to having 60 votes. So I think this is likely to all be litigated out, dealt with in the various states around the country through the democratic process. All of these, I think, are landmark decisions, decisions, I think, rendered by men and women who believe the job of a judge to follow the law. Now, some have said, with regard to the abortion case, that precedent should always prevail. And I think we have a new county attorney here. I won't put her on the spot. But let me just say, precedent is important. It is important. But sometimes precedent is wrong. So let me give you a classic example of someone that involved a Supreme Court justice from Kentucky. The case was Plessy versus Ferguson. The case in 1896 upheld racial segregation on rail cars, which is the way people moved around then. There was one dissent in that case. The dissenter was John Marshall Harlan from Kentucky, who went to Centre College, was appointed to the Supreme Court by Rutherford B. Hayes in 1877 and served until 1911. And John Marshall Harlan said that was a violation of the 14th Amendment and also a violation of a civil rights bill that had been passed by the Congress that was largely ignored. 58 years later, the Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education basically adopted Harlan's dissenting opinion, and it became 9-0, the law of the land, bringing down racial segregation in public education. So I raise that just to make the point that precedent is important, but sometimes the precedent is outdated or wrong. And this issue sent back to the democratic process for the will of the American people through their elected representatives to make the decisions.
Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican at the Rotary Club of Florence, Kentucky. He is the Senate Minority Leader. Even as he said that he does not believe that Congress will be able to pass any abortion-related legislation as the 60-vote threshold needed in the Senate. Today, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, is sending a letter to fellow Democrats in the House suggesting 3 possible pieces of legislation that will be brought before the House soon. One would codify the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that legalized abortion. Another would make clear that women are free to travel across the country for any reason, an effort to preempt any attempts by states to prohibit cross-state travel to get abortion or have those services. And a third bill that the House could bring up would protect reproductive health data like those stored in apps from being collected and distributed to third parties. Washington Post Live did an interview on the Supreme Court decision with Senator Tina Smith, a Democrat from Minnesota, today. She supports abortion rights and emphasized the need to elect more pro-choice legislators at all levels of government to pass laws guaranteeing those rights. She was also asked about her state's ability to be a place where women from the surrounding states, which may ban or restrict abortion, could go for those services.
Minnesota is a state that could be some sort of sanctuary state, giving people access to abortion. How is Minnesota prepared for that?
I mean, it's impossible to be prepared for that. Minnesota has, I think, 8 abortion clinics, mostly located in the Twin Cities area. A couple of weeks ago, I visited a clinic in Duluth, Minnesota, that is serving women across northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and northern Michigan. They are doing everything they can, but they are severely resource constrained. In terms of the providers that they have, in terms of the physical facilities that they have, in terms of the financial resources they need to try to expand access to care, which they desperately want to do. So this is why I say that a ban on abortion in South Dakota or North Dakota or Wisconsin has effects on people not only in those states, but people living in Minnesota, because there is no capacity to absorb that additional need, in one place. You see already much longer waiting times as people call in to try to get an abortion scheduled and are being confronted with waiting 2 weeks, which could be too long to wait. So no, I don't think it's possible to be ready, because the resources and the capacity to respond to this need are just very difficult. This is why, if you care about this issue, it's important to support and do what you can to help support this. But at the end of the day, this is not going to be able. We can't solve this problem with philanthropy. We have to solve this problem by changing the laws and making sure that a woman in northern Wisconsin has the same rights that a woman living in northern Minnesota does.
Senator Tina Smith, Democrat from Minnesota, interviewed by Leanne Caldwell, Washington Post Live anchor. A new poll published today by NPR, PBS NewsHour, and Marist finds that 64% of those polled oppose the overturning of the Roe v. Wade decision. Also finds more Democrats than Republicans say they're more likely to vote in the midterm elections after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, 78% to 54%. From Stat News, the Supreme Court on Monday ruled that prosecutors need to prove that doctors knowingly prescribe drugs in aberrant ways to win convictions against them for unlawful distribution of controlled medicines. The decision came in a case brought by 2 doctors who were sentenced to decades in prison for unlawfully prescribing opioids. The doctors had argued they were acting in good faith, trying to provide care for their patients. The government, however, maintained that some prescribing patterns were so far out of bounds and so clearly did not have legitimate medical purposes that it amounted to a dangerous crime, no matter what the prescriber claimed their intent was. That was from Stat News. And speaking of drugs, illegal and legal, the White House National Drug Control Policy Director, Dr. Rahul Gupta, testifying today before the House Oversight and Reform Committee about the record 107,000 Americans who died of drug overdoses in 2021. Deaths from fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine all up dramatically. The committee chair is Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, Democrat from New York, asking what can be done.
Minnesota is a state.
Director Gupta, in addition to issuing this year's National Drug Control Strategy, what progress has the administration made so far in expanding access to services and care to prevent overdoses and treat addiction?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. We have had significant progress made. In fact, that now there are telehealth provisions that allow providers to treat addiction across the country, especially in rural areas, underserved communities, and behind the walls. Telehealth, including phone consultation, is a crucial aspect of expanding treatment. We know that less than 1 out of 10 people today are getting the treatment that they need. We've also allowed, DEA has mobile vans for methadone as well as take-home methadone. These aspects are helping us improve and expand treatment at a time when oftentimes people are dying without treatment. We're also making efforts to make sure that everyone can get naloxone, which is the antidote for opioid overdose reversal, which 3 out of 4, almost 80,000 people are dying because of the lack of naloxone. At the same time, we're allowing more and more physicians and providers, others, to be able to write prescriptions through practice guideline changes so that they're able to get more treatment across. So our goal of treating untreated addiction, creating the infrastructure. The American Rescue Plan has invested $4 billion, unprecedented amounts, and the president has now called for an increase in $3.2 billion. At 75 cents on the dollar of that increase of the $42 billion drug control budget goes towards making sure we're expanding treatment, we're expanding prevention, we're expanding recovery services.
Dr. Rahul Gupta, White House National Drug Control Policy Director, testifying before the House Oversight and Reform Committee, a virtual hearing. The question from the chair, Democrat Carolyn Maloney. Another committee member, Republican Ralph Norman of South Carolina, focusing his questions about drugs coming across the U.S.-Mexico border.
Now, I was listening to your opening words. You said that the Biden administration had a top priority for protecting Americans, protecting the border. Did you say that? I mean, am I right? He is doing a great job of protecting the border?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. We believe strongly that it is an important part of every nation to be able to secure and protect its border. There are a number of things that are going on in this area of counter narcotics that I think is important to note. As I visit, I speak to the women and men on the border.
No, Doctor, I don't mean to, I've got a limited amount of time. Is he taking the steps to protect the border, to close the border? Is that what I understand you to mean?
Congressman, thank you again. And the president is certainly taking steps to make sure that our border remains secured. Part of which is...
Okay, Doctor, okay. This is two different universes. If you're saying that the numbers, I assume you agree with the numbers of the illegals coming across. We're going to average 585,000 a month. We're up to, what is this, 1.6 apprehensions. Donald Trump had this with the wall, had this solved. We have 50 during the 3 prior years. Those on the terror watch list were basically zero. This past year is 50 on the terror watch list. How can you sit there and say that this administration has a goal of protecting Americans? I'm in the construction business. We had a leak on one of our projects. You stopped the leak in the pipe. We had a dam that had a leak in the dam for the water. You stopped the leak. Really, this is a mischaracterization at best for you to say this administration, either the numbers are completely false. We're getting an unprecedented number of people coming across. We already got 3 to 5 million illegals in this country.
Congressman Ralph Norman, Republican from South Carolina, questioning the White House National Drug Control Policy Director, Dr. Rahul Gupta. You can find the full House Oversight and Reform Committee hearing from today archived at cspan.org. On Wall Street, the Dow down 62, NASDAQ down 83, S&P down 11. American Farm Bureau Federation says the average cost of the 4th of July cookout this year is 17% higher than last year for an average 10 people, $69.68, up about $10 from 2021 as inflation and supply chain problems continue to raise prices on food and other commodities. But a couple of the food items on their cookout menu did see a drop in price. 2 pints of strawberries, down 16%, a pound of sliced cheese, down 13%, and a 16-ounce bag of potato chips, down 4%. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The January 6th committee returns earlier than expected after today's announcement that it would hold a public hearing on new evidence tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. Watch on C-SPAN. C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app, or anytime online at cspan.org. You can also visit our website, cspan.org/January 6, to watch previous hearings and other videos related to that day. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. The Biden administration is preparing to send to Ukraine an advanced air defense system in the latest package of military aid in Ukraine's war against Russia's invasion. CNN reporting, citing an unnamed source familiar with the announcement, that the weapons are a Norwegian advanced surface-to-air missile system, a medium to long-range air defense system that has a range of more than 100 miles. Joining President Biden at the G7 Nations Leaders Summit in Germany, the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he spoke with reporters, got a question on this, didn't go into a lot of detail, but he did say the system being delivered is advanced.
The new military assistance that is being confirmed by an administration official.
So I've seen the reports of specific details around advanced air defense capabilities that the United States is preparing to provide to the Ukrainians. I can confirm that we are, in fact, in the process of finalizing a package that includes advanced air defense capabilities. I won't get into the details of the system. I'll wait till the contract actually gets done. But this week, as the president told his fellow G7 leaders, and as he told President Zelensky, we do intend to finalize a package that includes advanced medium and long-range air defense capabilities for the Ukrainians, along with some other items that are of urgent need, including ammunition for artillery and counter-battery radar systems.
I need to cut you off. Were you done? I was going to ask you more about the conversation with President Zelensky this morning with the G7 leaders. Did President Zelensky have any specific requests of them? Did the President and the other G7 leaders have a particular message for President Zelensky? What was the nature of that conversation?
So he did have some specific requests. His first request in the presentation he made was for further air defense systems. In particular, at the top of his mind was the set of missile strikes that took place in Kyiv and other cities across Ukraine, and his desire to get additional air defense capabilities that could shoot down Russian missiles out of the sky. So the president was able to be positively responsive to him on that. He had some other requests relating to economic assistance to ensure that Ukraine's economy can remain basically stable and afloat. And President Biden and other G7 leaders were able to explain to him the assistance that we're providing on a monthly basis and to the tune of a total of $7.5 billion in economic assistance from the United States. But the bulk of the conversation was not about asks and gives. It was really about the way forward and how President Zelensky sees the course of the war and is trying to assimilate and incorporate all of the assistance he's been given to maximize Ukraine's capacity both to resist Russian advances and to pursue counterattacks where possible. A lot of it was detailed and sensitive. It was a real conversation about strategy, and so I'm not going to go further in terms of public characterizations of it, because this was genuinely an opportunity for the G7 leaders plus Zelensky to really talk turkey about how to help Ukraine achieve its objectives and how to help deny Russia its objectives. And I think a lot came out of it that we can collectively follow up on.
The U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan with reporters in Germany at the sidelines of the G7 Leaders Summit. G7, our group of seven, is the U.S., United Kingdom, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, and Canada. Another issue that came up is countering China's global influence, especially its Belt and Road initiative of investing in other countries and projects of other countries in ways that critics say could amount to a debt trap for those countries. On Sunday, the leaders announcing a global infrastructure and investment initiative. Here's President Biden at that news conference.
1 year ago, when this group of leaders met in Cornwall, we made a commitment. The democratic nations of the G7 would step up and provide financing for quality, high standard, sustainable infrastructure in developing and middle-income countries. What we're doing is fundamentally different because it's grounded on our shared values of all those representing the countries and organizations behind me. It's built using the global best practices, transparency, partnership, protections for labor and the environment. We're offering better options for countries and for people around the world to invest in critical infrastructure that improves the lives, their lives, all of our lives, and delivers real gains for all of our people, not just the G7, all of our people. Today, we officially launched the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. We collectively have dozens of projects already underway around the globe. And I'm proud to announce the United States will mobilize $200 billion in public and private capital over the next 5 years for that partnership. We're here today because we're making this commitment together as a G7 in coordination with one another to maximize the impact of our work. Collectively, we aim to mobilize nearly $600 billion from the G7 by 2027. These strategic investments are areas of critical to sustainable development and to our shared global stability. Health and health security, digital connectivity, gender equality and equity, climate and energy security.
More on the G7 leaders meeting in Germany. Joining us now is Guy Taylor, National Security Team Leader for the Washington Times. Thanks so much for being here. We just heard President Biden about this new infrastructure initiative to counter China. How ambitious is it?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I think it's ambitious that this has become a center stage issue at the G7. This is the second year in a row that President Biden has tried to inspire this group of wealthy democratic nations to come up with investment, development, financing for developing countries for infrastructure projects. Sorry. So there is some significance, but I think that we're lacking details as well in terms of where this really goes. What was announced over the weekend was more symbolic than anything else to sort of show that the G7 recognizes this sort of need to push back against China's increasing dominance in financing infrastructure projects in places like Africa, Latin America, much of Southeast Asia. And really, Biden is trying to lead the charge here to at least get these countries. I mean, look, the G7 is basically wealthy leaders from wealthy countries that get together for a photo op to try and show unity. But here they're kind of coming together and saying we all agree that these nations should use their clout to try and spur private investment from the democratic world to developing countries as an alternative to loans that those countries might otherwise or might also be accepting from China. And remember, the Communist Party-ruled government in China has pushed what's called the Belt and Road Initiative, spreading around hundreds of billions of dollars worth of loans over the past decade to developing countries. And these are loans that many Western officials, including in Washington, regardless of whether we're talking about Democrats or Republicans, really, they describe this Belt and Road program as kind of predatory loans, in that they burden economically weaker nations with debt that might in the future be relieved in exchange for things like access for Chinese government-owned companies to ports and precious metals and other key resources, oil, gas, et cetera, in whatever country accepted the loan to begin with.
The war in Ukraine also high on the agenda. Are the G7 leaders staying united on that front?
I think so. You know, look, there's a lot of speculation, especially in the media, that Russian government threats to cut gas supplies to Europe could contribute to an energy crisis that's already sort of gurgling in Europe. But I think we have to realize that there's symbolism again with the G7. Remember that Russia was actually a member of the G7 for a while back when it was called the G8, and Russia was viewed in the West as a kind of economically powerful but potentially emerging democracy. All of that changed just back in 2014 after Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine. Look, Russia began its proxy occupation back then, and then we jumped to this past year, and the Russians have launched their invasion. We've had this very bloody period of the past 4 months, really, and the G7 is kind of this go-to organization of the world's wealthiest democracies, not only Europe and the U.S. and Canada, but also Japan, for dealing with the kind of collective response to Russia's actions. So there is speculation about Russia's ability to drive a wedge in there, but I think so far we're seeing in the first couple of days, remember this is going to go on until Tuesday will be the real big one. So I think we're seeing unity so far, and I think we're going to see a formal announcement of a ban on Russian gold imports, which matters for countries that are facing big sanctions. And I also think we're probably going to see a formal announcement on some kind of a cap on Russian oil imports. But we'll see. And again, like I said, there is speculation because Russia is a major provider of gas to Europe. And as much as we might talk our way around that, it's a reality at the end of the day. And all of these countries know that.
We're talking with Guy Taylor from the Washington Times. After President Biden leads the G7 meeting in Germany, he's heading to Madrid, Spain for the NATO leaders meeting. An announcement today that they are increasing their rapid response force dramatically. It almost seems like Russia's war in Ukraine accomplished what former President Donald Trump couldn't, which was pushing Europe to spend more on defense.
Certainly seems that way, doesn't it? I mean, it's definitely interesting to see the extent to which the Russian military invasion in Ukraine has inspired unity in NATO, inspired governments in Europe to spend more on defense. These are things I think that we have to be watching closely just to see what the trend lines are, to see is there actually an increase in what are the implications if Germany, which already has announced an increase in its defense spending, something that going back to the Obama administration before Trump, there was a lot of griping in Washington about how the Germans weren't spending enough on defense, or weren't spending the 2% of their GDP towards defense, which is this thing that the United States has been really requesting of NATO for many years. So I think we're seeing that, and I think that this NATO summit is going to be interesting because I think people thought that Russia's very violent war in Ukraine was a bit of adventurism, but now it's gone on for really months. And what we're seeing around this G7 summit and now the NATO summit in Madrid is that Russia over the weekend increased its missile attacks again and actually struck Kiev, an apartment building, a kindergarten. So we hadn't seen that in quite a few weeks. And I think that was almost like a taunting or to show, look, this war is still going on. So a lot of evolving fluid dynamics in the sort of geopolitical realm with this stuff. But it's certainly interesting to see that it appears there's unity. Let's also remember, though, a key point here, that these two neutral countries of Finland and Sweden have signaled since the Russian invasion their desire to join NATO formally. But within NATO, there's actually resistance over that from Turkey, over a really sticky issue of Kurdish terrorists, essentially, or Kurdish militants that the U.S. hasn't recognized as terrorists, but Europe has. Turkey calls them terrorists. It becomes very sticky very quickly. We're talking about the PKK, a group that Finland and Sweden have essentially played a kind of neutral role towards over the past couple of decades to try and mediate between Turkey and these groups. Turkey is so far kind of pushing back against Finland and Sweden joining NATO, and I think that could be a central issue this week. It's certainly going to be discussed all over the sidelines, whether it makes it to the center stage or not in Madrid when all these leaders get together from really the biggest alignment, military alignment of Western nations in the world. Whether it makes it to the front stage, I think, remains to be seen. But that, that's playing out as well. So it's not all unity. There's also friction. Remember, these countries in NATO are democracies. Democracy is inherently chaotic. Not always do these countries totally align on everything. So these big summits feature debate behind the scenes as well.
Guy Taylor covers national security for the Washington Times. Find his stories at WashingtonTimes.com and on Twitter at Guy J. Taylor. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me. I love C-SPAN.
And the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg holding a pre-NATO summit news conference at NATO headquarters in Brussels. As Associated Press writes, NATO will increase the strength of its rapid reaction force nearly eightfold to 300,000 troops as part of its response to an era of strategic competition.
At the summit, we will strengthen our forward defenses. We will enhance our battle groups in the eastern part of the alliance up to brigade levels. We will transform the NATO response force and increase the number of our high readiness forces to well over 300,000. We will also boost our ability to reinforce in crisis and conflict, including with more pre-positioned equipment and stockpiles of military supplies, more forward-deployed capabilities like air defense, strengthened command and control, and upgraded defense plans with forces pre-assigned to defend specific allies. These troops will exercise together with home defense forces, and they will become familiar with local terrain, facilities, and our new pre-positioned stocks, so that they can respond smoothly and swiftly to any emergency. Together, this constitutes the biggest overhaul of our collective defense and deterrence since the Cold War. And to do this, we need to invest more. Today, we are releasing new defense spending figures. They show that 2022 will be the 8th consecutive year of increases across European allies and Canada. By the end of the year, they will have invested well over $350 billion extra since we agreed our defense investment pledge in 2014. 9 allies now reach or exceed the 2% target. 19 allies have clear plans to reach it by 2024, and an additional 5 have concrete commitments to meet it thereafter.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg at NATO headquarters in Brussels. The heads of state and government of the 30 NATO nations begin their summit in Madrid, Spain, tomorrow. A Russian court setting a start date for the criminal trial of U.S. basketball star Brittany Griner. The date is July 1st. It has been more than 4 months since Griner was arrested at a Moscow airport and charged with cannabis possession. She had allegedly vape cartridges containing cannabis oil. This came a week or so before Russia invaded Ukraine. If convicted on charges of large-scale transportation of drugs, she could face 10 years in prison. Former U.S. Congressman Frank Wolf, Republican from Virginia, was recently appointed to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. That's a bipartisan federal government agency created by the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act, which Congressman Wolf, then Congressman, authored. At a meeting today of the Commission on Capitol Hill, Frank Wolf discussing the U.S. removing Nigeria from a list of countries of particular concern for having engaged in or tolerated systemic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom. This despite a recommendation from the Commission to keep that country on that list.
The State Department designated, as many of you remember, Nigeria as a country of particular concern for the first time in 2020, but then for some reason delisted the country last year. The findings of the commission confirm the position that the State Department should redesignate Nigeria a CPC this year. And interesting enough, while USERF staff was in Nigeria, there was an attack on a Catholic church in Ondo State on Pentecost Sunday that killed at least 40 people. And this is just a recent example of continuing violence in Nigeria, where a number of killings of people of faith have reached the thousands, especially against Christians, and it seems almost this last month against Catholics. My own view, I think while the CPC designation is necessary, it is not sufficient to address the broad spectrum. Every day there's an article. If you go into every day somebody's being killed. The broad spectrum of grave religious abuses of all groups in Nigeria. So there's much more has to be done. Again, my own personal views. If you read Gregory Stanton's comments, it's genocide. Watch, genocide said there is genocide, and genocide is a big word. It's a powerful word. It's a word that when the commission and others called what was taking place against the Uyghurs, genocide. Boko Haram is involved in genocide. Genocide, clear, no question. And also the Fulani militants involved in genocidal massacres. And I urge you to read Greg Stanton's comments. And lately, against the Catholic Church, every day I get a new article. And so I think what the commission is saying, it is not just sufficient to address the broad spectrum of grave religious abuses. I close by saying this. Nigeria is the largest country in Africa. Over 200, maybe 20 million people. Many people believe, and when you go there, they're good people. Of all faiths, they're good people. They're looking to the United States to do something about it. Many people say, so goes Nigeria, so goes all of Western Africa. We should do everything we can to make sure that that does not take place, and we should be supportive of all the Nigerian people.
Frank Wolf, member of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, at an open forum of the commission today on Capitol Hill. Frank Wolf was a Republican member of Congress from Virginia from 1981 to his retirement in 2015, and he wrote the 1998 Religious Freedom Law that created the commission that he is now on. State Department did not put Nigeria on this list of countries of particular concern in 2021, even though the commission recommended it. Same thing with India, Syria, and Vietnam falling into that category. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. You can get more of Washington's top stories sent to you every day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.